Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute.
Oh, we were going to change our names.
You can still do that if you want to and add the affiliations. Yeah.
What are we writing, Gill?
Jill's got IMMA Secretariat.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it looks like everyone's transferred over, so we'll go ahead and get started. Let's see. Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on important marine mammal areas, IMMAs, giving marine mammals a seat at the negotiating table. We're very glad all of you could join us here today. My name is Sarah Carr, and I'm Chief Knowledge Broker for OCTO, Open Communications for the Ocean. I'm joined today by our presenters Erich Hoyt, Giuseppe Notarbartolo di Sciara, Gill Braulik, and Simone Panigada of the IMMA Secretariat of the IUCN Marine Mammal Protected Area Task Force. Today's webinar is brought to you by OCTO. We're an NGO that connects ocean professionals to the knowledge and networks they need. Through our programs and communities, we empower conservationists and resource managers to apply best practices worldwide. This webinar will last for an hour. The formal presentation by our four presenters today will be followed by an open question and answer session. You can submit questions for the Q&A by submitting them through the Q&A panel of the user interface or the chat panel, also in the Zoom user interface. You can send questions throughout the presentation. We have a slight preference for the questions go into the Q&A, but if you send them into the chat, you can make them visible to everyone and get feedback from others on the webinar as well, other attendees. So feel free to use either option. In the chat panel, you can also share relevant resources throughout the webinar with both the panelists and myself, as well as all the other attendees. You can choose who your chats go to, and feel free to take advantage of this and share knowledge throughout the webinar. We just ask that you keep it professional and on the topic. A recording of today's webinar will be available on the OCTO website, www.octogroup.org/webinars later today. And that's all from me. I'll hand things over to our presenters now. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Erich Hoyt, co-chair of the IUCN Marine Mammal Protected Areas Task Force, and I'm going to talk today about what are IMMAs and why do we need to identify them. I'm going to do a brief history of the IMMA with a quick timeline. In the 1990s and early 2000s, marine protected areas were coming on stream and being approved at a fast rate. But whales and other marine mammals were often not included. The Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD, was setting very ambitious targets for identification of important ocean areas to protect through the EPSA, the Ecologically or Biologically Significant Areas program. But whales were being left out because the data were difficult to access. Now, we discovered this partly through getting involved with the CBD EPSA program, as well as by researching MPAs and finding that they did not include very many marine mammals. And the existing marine protected areas didn't correspond to what we were learning about marine mammal habitat. Next slide. Existing marine mammal protected areas were too few in number, too small in size, located mainly in restricted coastal and inshore habitats, protecting relatively few marine mammal species, and often poorly designed, adopting arbitrary or political boundaries with little attention to the specific habitats of marine mammals. So the IMMA program began as a strategic response to this. And at the 2013 impact meeting in Marseille, Giuseppe Notarbartolo di Sciara and myself, with Naomi McIntosh, all of us then part of the International Committee on Marine Mammal Protected Areas, formed the IUCN task force with the Species Survival Commission and the World Commission on Protected Areas to work on the idea of a tool for identifying marine mammal habitat throughout the global ocean. And we tried to rope in more of the marine mammal research and conservation community, process that had already started through the series of conferences we'd organized through the International Committee on Marine Mammal Protected Areas. These conferences were in Hawaii in 2009 and Martinique in 2011, which started to bring us all together. An IMMA is the definition, a discrete portion of habitat important for one or more marine mammal species that has the potential to be delineated and managed for conservation. It's a place-based conservation tool like important bird and biodiversity areas, IBAs, and more recently, the important shark and ray areas, the ISRAs. Now, the identification of IMMAs is an evidence-driven, purely biocentric process based on the application of scientific criteria and the best available science. It's not a marine protected area, and IMMAs are not identified on the basis of political or management considerations, just on the basis of data. IMMA selection criteria were developed after an extensive scientific and public consultation undertaken between 2013 and 2015. The 8 criteria and sub-criteria were designed to capture important aspects of marine mammal ecology to encompass multiple aspects of species vulnerability, as well as the distribution, abundance, key life cycle activities, and high diversity. The criteria were aligned with roughly comparable criteria that was used for EPSAs, KBAs, IBAs, but tailored to marine mammals. IMMA criteria and guidance were drafted in consultation with more than 1,000 experts within the marine mammal research and conservation community. And the guidance, which we now call the IMMA Handbook, is updated on a yearly basis and is available for download from our website. In 2016, we held the first IMMA workshop covering the Mediterranean, and in 2017, the first IMMAs went on the IMMA e-Atlas. You can see a snapshot of it there. We now have an 8-member secretariat and a growing task force, and Giuseppe now will tell you about where we stand with the global identification of IMMAs, including our latest news on completing the North Atlantic.
Thank you, Erich. My name is Giuseppe Notarbartolo di Sciara. I'm the co-chair of the task force. And I'm going to give you a very quick overview of the process whereby we have been putting the IMMAs on the map. And as Erich mentioned, we have been progressing region by region. And by now, we have covered about 80% of the global ocean waters with 11, no back please, with 11 regional workshops and involving about 320 experts. And you can see on the map in the yellow, the regions that we have completed, and in blue, the region that we had completed just at the beginning of this year, the Northwest Atlantic and the wider Caribbean. And you can see that there are a few regions that still have to be arranged. Next, please. So once the workshop is concluded, each workshop is concluded, we come up with a number of candidate IMMAs that then are proposed by the regional expert of the workshop, and they are reviewed by an independent panel before being posted on the task force e-Atlas. And you can see the process here. The yellow are the IMMAs, and the blues are the areas of interest, and then you could click on one and you can get FIS brochure that will tell you everything about the each particular IMMA that can also be downloaded as a PDF. Next, please. Of course, we're very happy to acknowledge our main supporters. We have a number of supporters, but the main supporters were the government of Germany through the International Climate Initiative that has supported 7 regions, most of the southern hemisphere. The Water Revolution Foundation that has supported the 2 regions of the North Atlantic, the Northeast Atlantic Ocean and Baltic Sea, and the Northwest Atlantic and wider Caribbean. The MAVA Foundation supported our very first IMMA workshop in the Mediterranean, and the government of France that supported the extended Southern Ocean. And I just wanted to give you a very quick outlook of the last region that we covered, which is the Northwest Atlantic and wider Caribbean, that ended up with the identification of 43 new IMMAs and 9 areas of interest in this region. You can see on the left an overall view of the region, and with a big movement of humpback whales into the Northeast Atlantic and the Arctic Sea. And then you have smaller areas, smaller views to see a little more in detail. Next. For what concerns the region, we can go, from very wide latitudinal shift from the tropics in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico with very warm water species, as you can see here. To next, the northernmost area, which is the southern Labrador pack ice whelping area, IMMA for harp and hooded seals and polar bears. So you can see the variety of species that each region can encompass. Next. So in sum to date, the IMMA work has resulted in the identification of 323 IMMAs and 196. You can get an overview here with 2 different projections. Next. So in the end, the IMMAs have provided important habitat for 100 of the 135 recognized marine mammal species. And of these, 76% of IMMAs were identified at least partly based on important habitat for threatened marine mammal species, i.e. that are being assessed as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered in the IUCN Red List. Next. So just to give you a quick overview in terms of data, the IMMAs surface cover more than 51 million square kilometers, which is almost 18% of the ocean examined in the workshops. Of these, a little more than 50% is within EEZ waters, and a little less fall within the areas beyond national jurisdiction. So IMMAs occupy 11.2% of the area beyond national jurisdiction surface examined in the workshop, and provides knowledge that can be used to contribute to the end Global Biodiversity Framework goal, Target 3 in particular, of protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030, and also supporting the BBNJ Treaty. And I think at this point, I have come to the end of my part, and I give the floor to Gill for the next part of the presentation.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Hi, everybody. I'm Gill Braulik. I'm Deputy Chair of the task force, along with Simone. And I'm also a lecturer at the University of St Andrews. And I'm going to walk you through some of the ways that you can access the wealth of information that is encompassed by the IMMAs, and explain some of the diverse ways that the information is being used. So the primary repository of information about everything to do with IMMAs is on the website. You can see the address here, marinemammalhabitat.org. This stores all of the reports, all of the details about the workshops, past, present, and future, and all of the details about the current IMMAs and AOIs, including the species and criteria that can be interrogated and downloaded. So the IMMA e-atlas is sort of the central part of the website, and which is a global map that you've already seen showing all identified IMMAs in orange and the AOIs, which are the areas of interest, in mid-blue. And it's possible to use the search function on this map to search for areas according to national jurisdiction or specific species. You can look for IMMAs of specific that satisfy certain criteria. There's also on the website a searchable database that has the same kind of information, but in a different format. Again, you can search that for species, criteria, name, or location, and that information can also be downloaded in a variety of different formats. And from both of those, from the e-atlas and the searchable database, if you click on any area, it takes you to this nice, concise summary page that will tell you briefly where it is, what the habitat is, what species are the most important in this area, and what criteria they satisfy. And then if you click, you can see on the screen here, there's View Fact Sheet, and that will take you through to multiple pages that give all of the details around how big the area is, which specific species were responsible for satisfying certain criteria, and what scientific data was used in order to make the case for why that particular area was important for that species, as well as a list of all of the scientific supporting evidence. And just for your interest, looking at some facts and figures from 2024, the top 7 areas with the most views, just to give you an idea of the huge variety, we had 2 areas from Australia that are important for migrating baleen whales, also 2 from the Philippines, one that has a very small resident population of Irrawaddy dolphins, the other that's really a big area that's important for high diversity of marine mammals. We've got an area important for sperm whales in the Mediterranean, and then two areas in the UK. So you know, a lot of interest in an enormous number of different areas with different criteria and species. And then because we are trying to create a product that is useful for decision makers, government, industry, we also take the information that's in the fact sheet and turn it into a brochure that is that can be downloaded, that can be cited, and that presents the same information but in a really much more sort of attractive, illustrated way that's more easily accessible. So illustrated with photos, illustrated with maps taken showing where the sightings are located, what's the underlying data. And also it shows how the brochure can be cited. And then finally, the spatial data, so the actual shapefiles or the geographic data you can request it from the website. There's a special form that you can see how to access here. It's also available, distributed by WCMC through the Proteus Partnership to multinational corporations that are part of that initiative, and also in the future will be part of IPCA, that have an arrangement with several hundred large oil and gas companies. And just a little insight into the interest in the shapefiles and how they're being used. So you can see the little graph on the right there with the red bars shows the number of requests we've received by year, and we've now had more than 1,000 downloads of the shapefile. And the requests are going up and up almost exponentially by year. And you can see the pie chart gives you an idea of who's requesting them. So, and it falls out roughly equally between governments, businesses, NGOs and charities, and with a slightly larger proportion from university and academia. And so we've had government departments from more than 40 countries requesting shapefiles. We've had more than 200 requests from industry and requests from more than 300 different universities in 65 countries. And then what are they actually using the information for? Well, we try to gather information about how it's being used. Obviously, once we've passed it on, it's hard to keep a track of all the details, but you can see some examples on your screen, and it's being used by multiple governments for things like marine spatial planning, for proposing marine protected areas. It's been requested by numerous different navies. And importantly, as was touched on earlier, the keen interest in the use of the IMMAs has led to our sort of sister program, which was the establishment of the important shark and ray areas, which does something very similar for sharks and rays using a similar process that we developed. And a few more examples, and Simone will talk more about some of the work around shipstrikes and IMMAs. There's been great interest from cruise ships and from the shipping industry, and the layers are also now integrated into Global Fishing Watch. So just a little summary of what we know about how they're being used. And I'll pass over to Erich, who will give us a little more of a deep dive into that.
Thanks, Jill. So talking about implementing from the community point of view, I've got several things to report on. As part of our 7-year funding by Gobi from the German government climate initiative, we had the chance to visit 4 IMMAs and to talk to local communities and stakeholders about implementing those IMMAs. So we went to Palau in 2017, the Andaman Islands in 2018, Bazaruto Archipelago in Mozambique the following year, 2019, and then the Indus Estuary in Pakistan in 2023. And these are some of the scenes from various meetings and workshops. In Palau, we met with local, national, and indigenous people and developed an action plan, which seemed to be very positive at the time, but we largely failed in our efforts as we lost our main contact there and realized that we needed to have local leaders and a team on the ground that would guide this process and carry it forward. So the next year in the Andaman Islands, excuse me, we traveled with a very solid India-based team, and our efforts to break through the local bureaucracy, however, were only partly successful, but we did help lay the groundwork for locals to drive future actions, and that's still carrying on today. In Mozambique, we had valuable stakeholder meetings with tourism and the overall conservation sectors, and also got the media involved for the first time. The Bazaruto to Inhambane Bay IMMA was the last stronghold of dugong, or is the last stronghold of dugong, which is some 300 individuals in all of East Africa. The Mozambique government had given these oil and gas leases to a South African company called Sasol, is the acronym. And by leaking this story through the journalists about these last dugong and the oil and gas leases to an influential South African, to South Africa through the journalists, the result was that Sasol withdrew the leases. Now, finally, in Pakistan in 2023, we had meetings with local scientists and conservationists, as well as industry, and with WWF Pakistan, we held a one-day symposium inviting all the stakeholders and government. And this was very productive in terms of pushing forward initiatives for several of the coastal IMMAs. Now, since 2023, we've raised separate funding through whale and dolphin conservation to give grants to local research teams in 3 countries, having 1 or more IMMAs, Peru, Kenya, and Malaysia. And following what we learned from our own visits to support implementation efforts in these communities, we encourage these research teams to identify and engage with the larger user groups, and then to have a community get together to talk about how they would implement and monitor their IMMA. And this, of course, was a valuable exercise just to inform wider groups who didn't know anything about IMMAs and what they meant and what they could mean for marine mammals and the local communities going forward. And since these first 3 project areas finished a few months ago, we've added 2 more areas in Abrolhos archipelago in Brazil and in Oman, coastal Oman, that are still in process with great promise. And we in the IMMA Secretariat hope to have a future Octo webinar spotlighting the findings from these 5 communities with the lead researchers from each IMMA sharing their insights. But now I will hand over to our other task force deputy chair, Simone Panigada. Thank you.
Thank you, Erich. Hello, everyone. Very nice to see so many of you and so many friends online with us today. So I'm going to present a case of how IMMAs can be used to improve conservation, talking about the Mediterranean Sea and the establishment of a particularly sensitive sea area under the framework of the IMO. Vessel strike, as you pretty much all know, involving large cetaceans, represent a worldwide problem which is causing temporary and lethal wounds to cetaceans, especially large cetacean, with a strong concern about the high collision rates which have been reported on endangered subpopulation of fin whales and sperm whales in the Mediterranean Sea. And a high-risk area has been defined by several institutions, as well as within the IWC, as whale high-density areas which are intersected by high levels of traffic, naval traffic, which can be either commercial or touristic. And important marine mammal areas, IMMAs, which is what we've been discussing, can be used as tests to evaluate a mitigation measure by overlapping shipping routes using AIS system, automatic identification system, to indicate area which a higher likelihood of vessel strike. Next one, please. And thank you, Gill. The first IMMA workshop, which was organized in 2016 in collaboration with ACOBAMS in the Mediterranean region, identified a total of 26 IMMAs, of which 8 have large whales, fin and sperm whales, and primary species. And these are the target areas we are going to be discussing mainly in this short presentation. This is just an example of the evidence of a collision with a vessel. In the left, you see a sperm whale on the top and a fin whale on the bottom. These animals were lucky enough to survive after a ship strike, but you see clear evidence of the propeller marks on the body. On the right, you see one whale in a port carried on the ferry that you see in the back, and this whale was not as lucky and, of course, didn't survive the impact. So we did a little exercise a few years back, putting together the boundaries of the IMMAs, which was declared in the Western Mediterranean Sea, which you see here in with the red boundaries, and we overlap fin whale sightings obtained for online sources. It was mainly OBIS CMAP, with the trucks covered by cargo and container vessels. And as you can see, the little hexagons on the right are whale sightings, and they are pretty much using most of the area on the right of the slide between Italy, France, and the islands of Corsica and Sardinia. And if you go to the next one, we made a similar effort with sperm whale sightings, same data from the traffic, but a different species. And you see that there is a different overlap between traffic and the presence of the whale. So when we were discussing what kind of mitigation measure to suggest, it was very difficult because in one case, like in the sperm whale, you could say, okay, we move cargo trucks offshore and we avoid a high density area for sperm whales. But this would overlap highly with fin whale presence. And so the only solution for this area would have been to reduce the speed of the vessels. So if you go to my last slide, France, Italy, Monaco, and Spain joined effort and developed and supported the process for the designation of a PSSA, which is a particularly sensitive sea area, by the IMO at a scale that includes the Northwestern Mediterranean Sea slope and canyon IMMA, which was the main area which was used for the designation of this area, plus the eastern portion of two other important marine protected areas, the Pelago Sanctuary on the right and the Spanish Migration Corridor towards the west of the Mediterranean, to take into account whale population movements and distribution. The proposal has been proposed in December 2022 and has been accepted by the IMO in June 2023. And vessel strike mitigation tools, such as speed reduction and routing measures, have been proposed as part of the APMs, which are the associated protective measures within the PSSA. The most important thing for this area is that this is the first time that the IMO establishes an area based on the risk of vessel strike. So it really creates a precedent that we do hope will be followed by other areas around the world. And there is effort ongoing in the Arabian Sea, for example, to follow a similar approach. Thank you. I'm going to pass to the next and last speaker of this morning. Thank you very much.
Yes, Simone, thank you very much. It's me again, Giuseppe, and I just wanted to give you a very, very brief overview of what's next in our plans. Well, as you've seen before, there is still a share of the global ocean that has not been addressed by the IMMA work. So it's a little over 20%. We still have the Southeast Atlantic, the Arctic, and the Northeast Pacific on both sides. And then we don't forget that there are some marine mammals also in inland waters, mostly in South America, Africa, and Asia. So that is in our plans. Then beginning in 2016, which is 10 years after we first placed IMMAs in the map in the Mediterranean, we'll start reviewing the regions previously examined, starting with the Mediterranean, in fact, in order to address environmental changes and new knowledge gained over the past decade. So this is one part of our plans. Next. And then, of course, the main question is, excuse me, what do we do with IMMAs? I mean, we went through this big effort to put IMMAs on the map, but this is not just to put IMMAs on the map. The effort is to do something about the IMMAs. Gill has shown you that the IMMAs have had quite a bit of interest from a number of sea users, a number of government organizations. So that is already a very good thing, but we are very much also concerned about facilitating a link between the presence of the IMMAs and the local communities, and what Erich had just explained to you with this little red thing on the map is just an example of what we are trying to do now, but we are planning, depending on the funding availability, to expand that into many other IMMAs, particularly where marine mammals listed in the red list as threatened are hosted. Next. Yes, this was my last slide. Over to you again. Erich, would you like to conclude?
Yes, these are just our contact details. So I'll turn over to Sarah to moderate some of the questions that we'd be happy to answer.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, thank you guys. This was a great overview and presentation. We really appreciate you sharing all your expertise with us and work on the IMMAs. Let's see, we already have a lot of questions, so we have no shortage, and we may be able to go overtime a little if we are not able to get to all of them in the remaining time in the hour. Okay, so let's see. A question that came in early. Can you please share your plans for the Arctic waters, particularly around Iceland and Greenland?
Well, just those will be part of the Arctic workshop. We don't have the direct plans to do it yet. It relies on funding, and we're in the process of trying to raise that for the remaining 5 areas. But it will happen, and it will be a complex workshop. It has a lot of very diverse players, and it's a fast changing area, in terms of climate change and ice melting, and it's going to be a huge challenge, but we're going to do it.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Another question from Sam Mansfield in Transport Canada. Thank you for the interesting and useful presentation. I have 2 questions. Can you please clarify the difference between an IMMA and AOI? And can you please provide a bit more detail on what's involved in the workshops used to create IMMAs, attendees, process, etc.? Thank you.
I'll take this last one, then I'm going to turn it over to everybody else. Yes, IMMAs are the approved areas that go through the workshop process, where we will have anywhere from 20 to 50 scientists accessing the data for a given region and submitting preliminary areas of interest. It starts with that. And then through discussions, those are shaped into candidate important marine mammal areas, candidate IMMAs. And then at the end of a week-long process where everybody's been confined to a room and hopefully fed well enough that they continue working. And we do have amazing cooperation and collaboration in these workshops. Then it goes to peer review, and that's quite a long process, over several months, and then a refinement of all the different areas that are accepted, plus a lot of back and forth with the points of contact that originally submitted those areas. And the areas that are not accepted as IMMAs, there may be some areas of interest that are put forward in the workshop, but there are also a number of areas that fail to become IMMAs because there's not enough data, and those also become areas of interest. So we think the areas of interest on the map, those blue areas, are really important because these are potentially future IMMAs if more research is done and more data is gathered. So we're glad that we can highlight those as well.
Right. Thank you, Eric. Was there anything anyone wanted to add? Okay, we'll move on then. Another question that came up was, is there an API or REST service that we can access the spatial data from instead of file-based shapefile downloads?
It's for you, Gill.
The answer is I'm not 100% sure, but essentially at the moment we have individual requests are made to us, and we try to respond to those within a day or 2. There are the other 2 platforms I mentioned. There is also at least one web map service available where they can be accessed. But we have the part of our team that deal with the digital data. I can pass on your request to them and get more detail. But essentially, the web map service is also available.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. And this one is more of a comment, but I'll read it and see if there's any response. Great to see all this coming together. It is interesting to see later IMMAs including more and more offshore waters. I believe offshore areas are still underrepresented and need concerted maybe effort across border. concerted cross-border efforts to increase research that covers the open waters of our ocean.
Did I get this? Yeah. Okay, see nodding, everybody. Yeah, I think this question is from Ada Natoli, our colleague from the Emirates, who participated in the West Indian Ocean and Arabian Seas workshop a few years ago. It's a very good question. Unfortunately, when we look at the IMMA Atlas, we see a lot of blue in the middle of the ocean, and that's certainly not because there are no important areas for marine mammals there. It is because the availability of our data decreases as we go further from the coast, and that is, it's pretty easy to understand why, because a lot of most of research is done closer to the coast. It's cheaper. You can do it with smaller means, with smaller boats, etc., etc. And so that is the reason why the open ocean is poorer of IMMAs. And the only solution to that is that we hope that in the future, as year after year, the data will come in. More investment is going to be made into research. More technology can be used, for example, satellite technology or other technology to investigate the open ocean. But there are some limits to what we are trying to do, and in our means.
Okay. Thank you, Giuseppe. I appreciate the response. Another question let's see. Wonderful to see how IMMAs have progressed since the early days in CMS and elsewhere. What is your strategy for feeding IMMAs into the high seas MPA network under BB&J and integrating with all the other taxa-specific, for example, ISRAs, as well as all taxa site identification tools?
Should I get this?
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, well, one of the strategy is to make sure that that more people knows about the IMMAs, and in fact, this webinar is very, very useful for that purpose. But I think integrating the IMMAs into the main policy structures that are out there is going to facilitate the use of the IMMAs by those who will be looking into potential areas to be protected into the high seas. And in particular, I'm thinking about the EBSA program from the Convention on Biological Diversity, which unfortunately has been revived at the last COP of the CBD. It has been put on sort of on a back shelf or on ice for several years, and now is being revived. And as soon as the people start looking at the EBSAs again, of course, now we have a lot of information to provide to the EBSA process with the IMMA process. It's going to be very easy to integrate the two programs. And this is just an example, but there is, the CBD is also responsible for the for pushing forward the global biodiversity framework, the 30 by 30 target 3 of the framework, and of course every information that is available to provide a view of areas that deserve to be protected into the high seas is going to be taken, and the IMMAs are there to be used.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Let's see. Another question that came in: are there commitments and responsibilities of governments towards IMMAs? And thank you for all your work.
Yeah, I can get this one. The commitments from the government is the second step of our effort. We meet with the scientists. We do a purely biocentric operation without taking into consideration any government or any threat. And then the implementation cases, which were presented by Erich earlier on, need to facilitate a stronger liaison between the scientific community, the declaration of the IMMAs, and the governments. So it's a fairly longer process. Nowadays, we see more and more interest by the governments, and this was reflected by the number of requests of shapefile we received over the last few years. We are based in Italy, so the European Commission is a clear example I always bring. We have been to meetings with European Commission delegates, and they were referring on a regular basis to the presence of IMMAs within the Mediterranean, within the Black Sea, within the Northeast Atlantic. So this was a very good example of how well this was perceived. And the example of the PSSA also makes it very clear. Italy, France, Spain, and the Monaco Principality used really pretty much the IMMA borders to facilitate the process of the identification of the PSSA. So it's a very important link. It's the second step of this, but we are moving forward with implementation and with the degree of acknowledgement by the governments of our effort. Thank you for the question.
If I may add just a few words to Simone, there is actually a framework that encourages formally governments to take notice of the IMMAs and make use of them. And that is a resolution that was adopted in 2017 by the Convention on Migratory Species, specifically on the IMMAs, and urging the parties to the CMS to support the IMMA program and make use of the IMMAs. So that, of course, is not the entirety of the nations that border on the ocean that have anything to do with the ocean. Unfortunately, there is quite a few nations that are not part of CMS, but it was a great start, and it gave us a very big push in opening a contact surface with the world's governments.
Okay, thank you, Simone and Giuseppe. Let's see, we've had a couple different questions asking about whether people can join the task force and then help with the workshops.
Yes, I mean, we invite experts from a given area right before we're doing that particular workshop. So there's not really, we're not really set up to do that. Some of the people that end up at those workshops do become members of the task force with certain responsibilities. However, and this addresses another question that's I can see in the feed, and that is that we have built up this network of all the researchers we've now worked with, which is, well over 300 individuals, and of course it's even wider when you start looking at our task force and people they know and all of that, and all the people who have downloaded the shapefiles and started using them. So our network is really getting quite large in terms of doing this work. I'm not answering your question directly, but I think there, with involvement, we're open to to that. We're not opposed to it, but it's something that's set up to do every 4 years through the IUCN process.
Okay, thank you, Erich. The question, let's see, it's good afternoon. I don't know if it was mentioned and I missed it, but are only some IMMAs being monitored?
Yes, only a very few are the ones that we put on the map in terms of our efforts to implement. I mean, we don't know how many more might be on people's radar and are looking at them. Certainly the people who put them forward have them in their minds, which is an important feature of it. But part of our work has been to publicize this, to use social media and news releases whenever a new one comes out, to get them translated, to get it out into the wider public and policy area as much as possible. But so I mean, ideally all of them would be monitored, but we now have more than 300 worldwide. It's becoming a bigger and bigger effort.
Thank you, Erich. Question, what kind of data is key to getting an IMMA designated, and how can applications be made?
I can
Jill?
get this if you want.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, sure. All the answers to the questions about how to propose IMMAs are in the handbook, which are on the website. Essentially, the important thing is that there is scientific data that will, for at least one species, justify that the particular habitat is important for that species for a particular activity or part of their life cycle, or that it encompasses a small resident population. And therefore, there needs to be data from visual surveys, from acoustics, from aerial surveys, from photo ID, some kind of scientific evidence that preferably is published, but in the scientific literature or reports that show that that particular area is more important than areas surrounding that. Obviously, not all parts of the ocean can be important for everything. It does come down to having the scientific data and having surveys conducted in order to be able to make that case.
Thank you, Jill. Another question, are there any plans or opportunities for funding for data deficient areas that have a high potential for becoming IMMAs, or is the responsibility solely up to that geographic region?
I can answer that one too. I think, I mean, in a nutshell, I guess we are not providing funds to gather data from areas of interest, but just by the virtue of bringing together so many researchers and scientists from one particular area to focus intensively for a whole week, considering the habitat and the oceanography and the bathymetry, as well as all the species that occur in that area. The process of identifying these sort of data poor but potentially very important places can really does help to kind of spur future work, get people thinking about what they might do to fill those data gaps. This is obviously a place that we know is quite important, but we don't have the data. And so I think that process has definitely led to proposals being written, people getting together to talk about, setting up new projects to start targeting those areas. And I know in the Western Indian Ocean in particular, that there's definitely been a number of places where that's happened. So although we don't necessarily do it proactively, I think it is a byproduct of the entire effort.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Let's see. Do you envisage governments using IMMAs to create protected areas with sterner regulation?
Yeah. I don't think we envisage that. It could happen. I think it's more that it may help in zoning efforts, in particular parts of an existing MPA or expanding an MPA. I suppose one example might be in Scotland with the Moray Firth, a special area of conservation. There is the IMMA identified, and it was known by researchers that those dolphins that live there in the Moray Firth protected area are traveling down the Scottish coast and even into English waters. So that IMMA identifies that. But does that become a protected area? Not necessarily. But it does put on the radar of those managers who are in charge of the Moray Firth that a body of international experts has said, yeah, let's look at this. This is part of your population and also has all these other features. So I think the response from government will be will vary a lot, but we're not necessarily seeing these as all MPAs or stronger MPAs or expanded MPAs. I mean, as Simone was talking, the shipping issues are, a big part of it. There's a lot of other outgrowths of the kind of work that we're doing.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Let's see. A question. There's already the World Shipping Council whale chart and the IMO PSSA areas that are well defined. But is there any way that we can get this information to a ship's bridge so ships know better where the whales are likely to be and when?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. There are several projects ongoing with this aim. The World Shipping Council is doing a very good job because it's moving the idea and it's pushing the idea and keeping the momentum on the need to focus on vessel strike mitigation. There are a few projects funded by the European Commission, one in the Mediterranean, one in the North Atlantic, one in the Canary Islands, which are aiming at finding the best way to detect an object or a whale in front of a vessel, communicate this information to the bridge, and at the same time, share the information towards neighboring vessels so that they are aware of the presence of a whale. There are apps for this. There is a Whale Alert app, and there is RepSet within the Mediterranean and the Agoa Sanctuary in the Caribbean. So there is not one solution, unfortunately. There are a suite of different options which are used by different stakeholders at different levels. It would be great if there was one tool, maybe broadcasted by the IMO, which facilitate the usage of this information in a unique way, but we are not there yet. But we are moving forward, and the fact that important IGOs such as the World Shipping Council are pushing these forward is, of course, extremely important, because we need the support of the industry if we want to see any action taken in the mitigation of vessel strike. Without the support of the industry, we are not going to go anywhere, because we will only suggest mitigation measures which are not used by the Shipping Council, and other companies are really facilitating this because they do believe that there is a need to act and to follow our guidance. Thank you.
Can I add to that?
Simone. Yes, please.
Yeah, just coming at this from a different angle, we've also developed a relationship through requests for the shape files or the spatial data from various companies that are like risk management, shipping planning companies that work with the shipping industry to provide the navigation software and do their routing. And so they've started to integrate the IMMAs into the navigation software, and we've had some discussions about what information they might receive and what they then might do with that. But that's definitely kind of a work in progress. But there seems to be a desire from these companies to include IMMAs and information like this in their decision-making process.
Okay.
And can I add just one more minute?
Yes.
Yeah, we are also in the process of trying to, with the support of the yachting industry, the super yacht industry, to place the IMMA information in navigation, in off-the-shelf navigation tools like charts, marine charts, GPS integrated, etc. So that's another way in which we can streamline actually shoehorn the IMMA information into everyday use among the people that the ocean goers.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to note that we'll keep going a little while longer with the questions past the hour. I know many of you who are attending will have to jump off, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming and for your interest in the IMMAs and for all your work protecting the oceans. We have more questions we'll be able to get to. In general, all those questions will be passed, both the ones in the chat and the Q&A, to the presenters, and they may be able to answer offline as well. But we'll keep on going a little, but I did want to thank everyone who had to leave right now. And thank you to all our presenters for being willing to stay on and answer some more questions. So another question that came in, it sounds like local or indigenous knowledge is not considered in the IMMA process unless it is in a Western scientific form. Is there any discussion of considering indigenous knowledge?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, I was really hoping this question would come out because it's an important thing that we need to do, and we haven't really done it properly, not because of lack of effort, but because of lack of result. And this is actually going to come up very importantly when we start addressing the Northeast Pacific and the Northwest Pacific and the Arctic in particular. We have already discussed this issue, for example, with Professor Ellen Marsh from Australia, who's been working extensively with First Nations in Australia, Aboriginals who have a very close relationship with the dugongs there. We need to address the problem. It is a very thorny one because we have to identify IMMAs, we have criteria that are science-based, and we need to make sure that we can involve and take advantage of the knowledge of the traditional knowledge in the IMMA process by in a way translating the information that comes from this type of stakeholders, of collaborators, into a way that can be adapted to the scientific criteria that we use to identify IMMAs. And you understand from what I just said, it is an almost insurmountable problem. And we need to work with people that understand and own traditional ecological knowledge in order to figure out how to do that. We are not ready yet. We need to work with people from that part of the ocean users to be able to work out a way of doing that. And so we need help, really. This is the end of my message.
If I can add something,
Yes, please.
Sarah, I mean, I think we have used that knowledge filtered through Helen Marsh, for example, who works with local people, with Aboriginals in her dugong work. So to some extent, and also in New Zealand with some of the researchers there. So to some extent, we've used it, but it's, we still have some huge challenges with the Northeast Pacific and the Arctic. But I think we also need to separate, because I was looking at the question here, we need to separate the making of marine protected areas with the assistance of native groups and the actual identification of these important areas. So those are two separate tasks, even though we've included both of them in our talk here. Our main work has been the identification of these areas, which is one hat, and the other hat has been working with local communities and sending these spatial tools out and people using them. And of course, that's completely up to local communities, with First Nations and Aboriginal groups, how they use it. That's a tool, but we realize that without their participation in this process at some level, that they won't be taken to heart. What the kind of scientific work that we've done. So yes, it's definitely at the forefront, as Giuseppe says, of what we're thinking about for these next regions.
Okay. Thank you,
Can I-
Giuseppe and Erich. Yeah,
Could
go
I
ahead,
say
Jill.
something? Just a little
Absolutely.
addition. I think there was a mention also of citizen science in that question, and I think that's something that we haven't touched on really yet. But citizen science absolutely plays a role and contributes to IMMAs, and I think that's one of the things that really make them special, is that it is all of this information can be useful and can help in the process. And so, for example, we've had workshop participants that run citizen science programs on cruise ships, recording sightings from cruise ships, also Shore Watch around the UK and East African citizen science programs. So yes, it doesn't, not everything has to necessarily be in a published scientific paper. There's a role for all these different kinds of data types.
And we've had the orca groups who put their researchers onto ferries and cruise ships at our workshops, our scientific workshops, reporting on what they've found, which has been extremely useful in terms of the IMMAs that are then set up.
Okay. Thank you all. Erich, and I see you're looking through at least the questions. I don't know if you're also reading the chat. Are there any questions? If we did a couple more questions, are there any you particularly want to address while we're live?
I can take this. There was a question on how to add new IMMAs and how to change areas of interest into IMMAs. The regional process is planned to be renewed ideally every 10 years. So, for example, we started with the Mediterranean in 2016. Now that 2026 is approaching, we should be in a position to organize another workshop on the Mediterranean region to update the situation. And this is where new IMMAs can be suggested. Maybe there will be more data to move areas of interest towards a proper IMMA. Otherwise, there is not another way to add. What we do when we get in contact with person with data and with information, we say, send us a draft proposal and we will keep into consideration once a further workshop will be organized. So it's a timely issue. We need to go time by time, region by region. But ideally, if we do collect and fundraise to have a second iteration of the Mediterranean Sea and the next region to follow, we will be in a position to reassess and most likely to identify new IMMAs and to move areas of interest into IMMAs as data have been collected over the last 10 years.
Great. Thank you, Simone. And then I put the question to all of you again. Like, are there any you particularly want to, I can select some or?
I see a question from Dag van Graven. Do we at all collaborate with national authorities related to large national management plan processes, for example, Norway, or do we only engage scientists that have data or knowledge of their own? Yeah, and I think wherever the data comes from, we're interested in it. And we do have in Australia, even in the US, in Canada, we had national authorities bringing their data sets. So it's not just individual scientists, but we're not, I think we're very careful about keeping the politics out of whatever we're doing. That's really important. It's purely biocentric. It's what the whales and marine mammals, where is their habitat? From their point of view, what are the areas that are important to them? matched against the criteria that we have. And wherever that data is held, we're willing to consider it. Just to add, though, we're not a data repository. And this was one of the key things with our whole process, was to allow scientists to query data, even unpublished data, or because we recognize that with marine mammals it was spread out all over the place, put that in a way that the reviewers could look at it and say this makes sense or this doesn't make sense. But we're not aggregating or taking that data, and that's partly, I think, why we've had such good cooperation across all sectors.
Okay.
There's one question that it's an easy one by Joanna Brandstetter. Are the IMMAs year-round, or do some temporal boundaries if the zone is only used for part of the year for breeding, for example? Yes, there are some migratory species that use IMMAs only part of the year, or for breeding, or for feeding, and but the IMMAs are there. They are there year-round, but the information that that particular IMMA is used only part of the year is included in the information that is given by in the IMMA. So sea users can make use of that by, for example, arranging some activity in that IMMA that is potentially noxious to the animal in a season in which the animals are not there.
Well, thank you, Giuseppe. Anything else? If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and I'll send you all the questions from the chat and the Q&A so that you can see them, because there are a lot in both that we were not able to get to. No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Erich, Simone, Gill, and Giuseppe. We so appreciate you being here to present. And we're looking forward to a couple more webinars on IMMAs later in the year. So everyone should stay tuned for those. And thank you to everyone who attended and for all your work and interest in this. And we hope you're able to attend the future webinars. And thank you to everyone. It's a great knowledge sharing event. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. And just final thanks to Erich, Simone, Gill, and Giuseppe.
And thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah, for organizing it and for guiding us. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Thank you so
Brilliant
much.
work.
Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.